to submit for the record a piece from Wikipedia. Unanimous consent to submit this. Okay.
With that objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Now, normally I'm actually a big fan of Wikipedia, but often it's not highly accurate. This is actually a great background piece on the shale industry. I'd like to point out that the costs are a little flaky, and the presumption of government control versus entrepreneurial incentives to invent new ways to do things cheaper are not dealt with here. But there's a great deal of background on who's using shale for oil today and how it's being done. And there is some discussion about some of the new technologies that are available. The article is heavily sourced and well linked for people that would like to learn a little bit about shale. And I brought a model of oil shale. This is the shale rock that's ground up, and then the shale is heated, or the oil is heated out, leaving black carbon, which is then burned off. And the result is actually a pretty innocuous shale that is crumbly and can be actually fit back in the same space that the shale itself comes out of, because you've got about 20% in the form of oil, 20% in the form of water in their shale. So it's actually, we know a great deal about the environmental process. In addition, you get some gases, you get some very high-priced light oils. There's some tar, about 20% is tar. But the vast majority of what comes out is a jet fuel, and it can be used for diesel with very little processing, meaning that instead of having a premium for diesel fuel in the market today, farmers could be paying a much lower price because the process of producing diesel is much cheaper. Mr. Abercrombie yesterday talked about the Turks invading Iraq and the problem with instability in America, and that's a true fact. We have a problem, and we ought to be addressing that not only in terms of the cost of energy, but also in the terms of the constancy of supply and availability. The majority's description of Section 104 really talks about, this section would amend the EPA Act to encourage a slower, careful approach, and talks about commercial leasing programs as early as 2008 as being too early, and says this is a conclusion which I just think is wrong. The industry is years away from establishing commercial viability, and it wants to create a programmatic environmental impact statement being prepared that would, with limited information. In other words, the suggestion here is that we don't know enough about this to move forward. The whole point of Section 104 is to slow down a process, when what we ought to be doing here is removing the impediments and letting the market decide whether those processes can work or not. Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming hold a conservative estimate of 2 trillion barrels of oil. Now, that 2 trillion barrels really is derived from what is cost effective to take out. If this technology that is presented by Oil Tech, one of the little companies that works, what you'll find is that we can produce shale from much lower quality, oil from much lower quality shale. And that means that there are not just 2 trillion barrels of oil, but maybe 3. There are some estimates of as many as 7 trillion barrels of oil in shale in Utah and Colorado. Now, not all that will be commercially recoverable, but in fact, a great deal of it would. And that's enough oil, for instance, about 3 times as much oil as Saudi Arabia has, and it's enough oil for just the 2 trillion barrels to meet U.S. demands for the next 400 years. Section 104 is presented as a good government approach. The reality is that we are intentionally, and by the majority's description of this section, we are intentionally hindering our ability to develop this oil out of shale. Now, I just might point out that Mr. Udall's amendment is a standalone title, and so the striking of Section 104 would not strike his amendment, which I think is important. You know, my agricultural sector is suffering. In Utah, we have dairy, we have some pork, we have cattle. All of those rely heavily on corn. Our policies, our national policies to produce ethanol have resulted in crushing my agricultural industry. What we need now is cheap diesel to help them cope with those prices and a shift away from ethanol. And the way to do that is by not limiting or slowing down or deferring the development of shale, but encouraging that. And so I would urge my colleagues to support this amendment and leave the law as we established it before, which is a speeded up process, and not put this impediment in the way of developing, I think, America's major new resource, for oil and gas. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, because this is obviously a significant issue in my state, which is why I support the amendment by my colleague from Utah. And I will try and make statements that are not redundant to the points that have already been made, especially because Mr. Pierce gave the outline of what could be a compromise position on this particular provision that would be very effective if we actually wanted to move in the manner of finding out what the regulation may be, as opposed to simply stopping the process. Page 10 and 11 are extremely harmful in a process that would basically shut down everything. Yesterday, I was very supportive of the coals to liquid research and development. I still am. I always will be. But they should be in addition to oil shale as well. And establishing new strategies at this stage of the game when, as Mr. Cannon said, the Interior Department has decades of lease and experience. And if not, the Canadians have the experience we need in what is now a $20 billion a year industry for them in oil shale. The concept is there. The studies are there. The work has been done. To create a new strategy right now has nothing more than to actually harm the process going in there. And my state estimates on a different bill, but it has a similar outcome, almost $1 million a year that would be coming down to the state of Utah for community involvement projects that would be dealing with royalties if we could merely move forward at the rate we are planning on going into it. This is extremely important. One other thing. We have the concept in some of this that we're after big oil. This stuff is not big oil. It's going after them. This is small developers going after this. These are companies like Red Leaf and OSCC that are the main developers. In fact, in Utah, in the nation, 82% of all natural gas and 68% of all U.S. oil is done by small businesses, names of which we have never heard. And 77,000 jobs are strictly on the line with this particular provision. It would be devastating to the state of Utah, and it's the wrong thing for this nation to do, and I support the gentleman from Utah's motion.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'll yield to the gentleman from Utah.
Certainly, we would like to discuss whatever we can do to create more certainty. But let me just make a distinction from what Mr. Pierce was saying, because you have a couple of tracks here that I think are very different. There are today two companies that are working on alternatives that are not 5 to 7 years off. And I would love to have you meet with those companies. Both are in Utah. We have in Utah the White River Mine, which cost $330 million to develop in 1977. So today, to duplicate that would be about $1 billion. And it has taken forever to get the licenses and permits to begin operating that mine. The company that's doing that is called OSEC, the Oil Shale Exploration Company. And they're committing very serious dollars, dozens of millions of dollars, to mining and then shipping shale to Canada, where they're using a retort to take the shale out with some new technology. Again, here, technology makes the difference between what happened in 1977 and today. So you have controls that allow us to deal with the gases that come off the process in a way that makes a great deal more economic sense. It is not Shell that we need to protect here. They are going forward in a time frame that is very long term. It is the entrepreneurial types that are investing dollars that will come in today, and if they come up with technologies that work, they will work profoundly well and quickly. But that if is really predicated on what Mr. Pierce pointed out, which is the certainty of the possibility of expanding and
Would
growing.
the gentleman yield?
Certainly. But I would like to work with the gentleman, and I think it would make enormous sense to sit down with the people involved in these two companies to see where they're going and why this language would harm what I think is the real short-term alternative to these longer-term technologies. So I yield back to the gentleman. Called OSEC, and which is now mining or about to mine shale in Utah. And the Utah company is going to send 20,000 tons of material up to Canada, to Alberta, to use their system, but with some technologies they've developed to see if they can produce reasonably out of that. And if they can, they'll bring that equipment down to Utah. So the shale in Canada is different. It's as lower, the quality is lower, and the value is less than what you have in Utah. And so the very people you're talking to would be coming into a high investment situation where that equipment would come to Utah and then be optimized. And so that's exactly what we're talking about, are the people you're dealing with. And I believe that they've decided, given their opportunity with tar sands and the low quality of their shale, that it's probably better using Utah, Wyoming, and Colorado shale with the system they've had in the past.